Hello, my name is Sean McGrath. I'm the founder of wideawakenews.com, and I'm the host of On Point, heard exclusively on the Boiling Frog Post. And I'd like to welcome you to our inaugural program tonight, On Point. And to kick off the program, we're bringing on a longtime advocate for freedom, a longtime advocate for the Constitution, and a friend of Wide Awake News, my website, and my other radio program. I'm happy to finally get to talk to him again, William Grigg. Our topic tonight is going to be divide and conquer rhetoric. We're going to talk a little bit about racism, bringing its ugly head to the surface right in time for an election season. We're going to talk a little bit about what happens to patriotic Americans, truly patriotic Americans, who stand up for their individual personal freedom and personal sovereignty, and how they are labeled as some kind of a rabble-rouser. And again, when we get into the election season, when we get into the time of year or the time of season when it's time to keep us fighting amongst ourselves, to put a wedge between Americans, we see these kind of things come to the mainstream. We see it pressed hard by the mainstream, but we need to step back, especially here in independent media, and redouble our efforts to focus on the true culprits in Washington, D.C., who are hell-bent on destroying your personal freedom, your personal liberty, and taking this country to a place that it was never meant to be. All right, let's bring on our guest for On Point tonight. Again, William Grigg. He is the founder of... say it for me, William, so I know I'm wrong.
Pro Libertate.
Pro Libertate. William, it's great to talk to you again. It's been too long since you and I spoke. I'm honored to have you on as my first guest on Point here on the Boiling Frog Post.
The honor is mine. Thank you so much.
You heard my little intro there, William, and you and I spoke just a bit today before the program tonight. And it's funny because without saying it, you and I, talking about the Donald Sterling thing, talking about what's going on with Bundy, you and I kind of had the same approach, or the same, I shouldn't say the same approach. You and I had the same result as far as our opinion on what's going on and why these kind of monikers are being plugged back into the narrative just coincidentally at this time of year when we're about to face a midterm election. What is your take? First of all, you wrote an excellent piece on Donald Sterling, and let's make it real clear. It is my opinion that Donald Sterling is an absolute scumbag. You know, what he said was he deserves to be prosecuted to the full extent of his contract with the NBA. However, that being said, he's an individual, and as an individual, he can be a scumbag all he wants. And if the NBA wants to prosecute him, throw him out, more power to the NBA. But as an individual, he should, and his actions absolutely should not be driving the narrative of our country. What are your thoughts on Donald Sterling? Great piece on him, by the way.
I appreciate that. I stand foursquare behind the proposition that even racist scumbags have property rights. Yeah. And if you can demonstrate that a person of that persuasion has violated the property rights of another individual, then you have a matter of public concern and perhaps a matter for some kind of civil action. And if it's serious enough, some kind of criminal action. But as Thomas Jefferson once said, and I'm paraphrasing, let my neighbor believe what he wishes to, let him believe in one God or 10 or none. It neither picks my pocket nor breaks my leg. The threshold question for public policy is whether somebody has committed an action that involves pocket picking or leg breaking. And Mr. Sterling did neither. And one of the things that I find really interesting is an insight provided to us by Dr. Thomas DiLorenzo, who's an irrepressible and inexhaustible fountain of worthy insights, that you have somebody who apparently has been convicted in the court of public opinion as an incorrigible racist who made millionaires out of black players. By virtue of market competition, he was compelled to provide employment for young black men. It made several of them millionaires who were wealthier beyond the wildest dreams of Croesus of old. And just within the last couple of days, there's been a complaint lodged by a member of the Clippers, who is among the Euro-American minority in the NBA, that he wasn't allowed to play because he's white. I don't know whether that's true or not. It's quite probable that you've got a very stern meritocracy, and this player's performance wasn't up to the expected standard. But in terms of his public performance, there's no evidence that Mr. Sterling has done anything that violated the property rights of another person, irrespective of his loathsome opinions. But that's neither here nor there from the perspective of the collectivists who are driving the narrative here. They want us to be obsessed over secondary and tertiary characteristics right now, particularly over matters of melanin content, because they want the public to hive off into little self-designated ghettos, actually ghettos that are designated for us by those who impudently presume to rule us. And they want to set us off against each other so that there will be horizontal conflict and we will not coalesce into a movement that would direct our attention at the people who have placed themselves over us. Like you say, it's classic divide and conquer.
Yeah, no doubt about it, and I couldn't agree with that more. It's funny. It isn't funny. It's disgusting, actually, how this has been brought to the forefront. When my country is involved in so many nefarious acts around this world, where people are dying every single day in the Middle East, in North Africa, in Eastern Europe, yet we're talking about Donald Sterling, and I agree with you as far as, if he's done something that he could be prosecuted by the law, then go for it. If there's agreements inside his contract with the NBA that if he acts like a jackass, he's going to lose his team. I don't. Here's the thing. Well, I don't care. I could care less about him. But I'm being forced to consume this as news, and it's rather disgusting.
Well, for the progressive left, as I've written elsewhere, bombs and drones may break human bones, but only racist words can hurt us. And these are people who believe that thought crime is an offense several orders of magnitude more serious than war crimes committed by the exalted personage who occupies the Oval Office. Barack Obama has killed more people of color than Mr. Sterling has employed. That's an interesting contrast, I think. Right now, as we're speaking, there are people of color being killed on the orders of Barack Obama. I am confident to the point of a moral certainty that that statement is true, because this is something that has occupied his thoughts, and his policy has reflected these priorities since he was inaugurated. Practically within the first 2 or 3 days of taking the oath of office and an act of public perjury, Mr. Obama started killing people overseas, most of whom are people of color. But this is seen, I guess, by the progressives as a necessary sacrifice on the altar of correct ideology. As long as they have somebody who's their ally in the culture war against people they genuinely despise here at home, they don't care how many people of color are killed as a matter of official policy presided over by Barack Obama. There was actually a really cynical deal struck in 2009 between some of the major so-called tolerance groups. The menagerie, the SPLC, the ADL, groups of that kidney. Mm-hmm. They endorsed a deal that was struck by the Obama administration to provide additional funding for the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan in exchange for a multi-tens of millions of dollars appropriation to enforce a hate crimes act. And so they're willing to make this trade-off where they will support a discretionary war that involves the deaths of innocent, poor people of color overseas in exchange for an amplification of their ability, with the help of the federal government, to prosecute a war against thought crime here domestically. I don't understand those priorities because it strikes me as somewhat immoral.
Yeah, no doubt about it. But let me look at it from a little bit of a different light here too, and get your perspective on this. I see it as you have two teams, right? And I'm breaking it down in layman's terms here. You have two teams: a red team and a blue team, the left and the right. And I see the folks that were supporting the Obama train under George W. Bush towards the end of his presidency. They were duped. They were completely and utterly duped. So this people that label themselves as the blue team, far left, bleeding hearts, whatever you want to call them, they've been completely codified by being given Barack Obama as president. But when the truth is told, and when we're looking at the results of this presidency, we are still continuing to prosecute the exact same wars. We're benefiting the exact same corporate special interests, and we're destabilizing regions of the world just as much and more so than we did under the red team. And folks that are watching this that think that somehow we're going to get some kind of a neocon resurgence of nationalism or a neocon in that office that's going to change things, guess what? The expansion of government is going to continue to grow, just as it did under Obama. Corporate welfare is going to continue to expand, just as it did under Obama. And the footing of war is going to be amplified once again. Is my perspective wrong, Will?
I think your perspective is very suitable and worthy of acceptance, because in the person of Barack Obama, you've got somebody who was calculated, I think, his public persona was calculated to appeal to the progressives, and in terms of substance, he's just as much a catamite for Wall Street as any of his predecessors have been, and very much a figurehead in the service of the same deeply entrenched corporate bellicose interests that constitute the much-storied military-industrial complex. And in substantive terms, he's not that different from his predecessor and his likely successor, whichever person they pluck off the shallow bench of these two largely interchangeable parties. Barack Obama's successor is likely to be defined by continuity with Mr. Obama, just as he has been defined by continuity with his predecessor. But you talked about the two teams here, Charlie, and that's a very useful insight that goes back, of course, to what we read in Tragedy and Hope, Carol Quigley's analysis of the power elite, where he talked about how the two parties should be completely interchangeable. That way you can rotate them every 2 or 4 years if necessary, and there'll be no disruptions in policy. That's exactly where we are right now. They play to slightly different constituencies, but both of the chief constituencies, the respective branches of the establishment party, support, within a very narrow band of variation, the same mixture of interventionist government at home and bellicose government abroad. And they just apply a different coat of cultural war lacquer to these two packages. But other than that, the contents are about the same. What happens, though, is that you have people embrace Lenin's dichotomy that defines politics. But the fundamental question, according to Lenin, is who does what to whom. And the who and the whom are the really important thing. The what remains constant. The what is aggressive violence, or the threat of aggressive violence in order to obtain things. All that matters from the perspective of blinkered partisans in this country is that they be the who rather than the whom. They be the pitchers rather than the catchers. And right now, in this narrative that's being imposed upon us regarding race relations, you have sort of an updated postmodern version of this, which is embodied in this horrible phrase, check your privilege. You've probably seen this or heard this. That's basically whom for idiots. If you are part of the whom, that is to say, if you're part of the designated oppressor classes, then you have to be the whom. And your privilege has to be nullified by making you the recipient of collectivist violence or threatened collectivist violence, to reconfigure your thinking and to expropriate your wealth to the extent that would be suitable to our overseers. And this is something that I think has been latent within the radical left for decades. It's just now reaching fruition, and just in time, as you say, for a midterm election that's probably going to be fought almost entirely on questions of identity here rather than questions of principle.
No doubt about it. No, absolutely no doubt about it. And we're pushing towards the end of the program, and I want to definitely get your take on, we talked about Sterling, who is, by all accounts, by his own words that we've heard, can be labeled as if nothing else, a hypocrite. But certainly a bigot, and personally, that's
the part of his veto that I find most offensive. This guy is an impenitent adulterer. That's something.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a great point that I didn't bring up. So you have a guy who's I'm just going to call him a scumbag again, layman term, scumbag, who's being thrown into the media to drive the narrative. Now, there's another example of somebody that's being labeled with a moniker in order to neuter the situation, and that's Cliven Bundy. Why don't you give us, we'll wrap up the program with you giving us your take on that situation, where it stands now, and where do you think we see that situation and more like it coming in the future?
You probably saw or heard or read about the very brief aside that Mr. Obama provided at the expense of Mr. Bundy at last weekend's orgy of self-approbation called the White House Correspondents' Dinner. He said something to the effect of any statement that starts off with, let me tell you something about the Negro is going to end badly, you don't have to listen to the rest of it. And of course that elicited a great big laugh from the trained SEALs who on cue are going to applaud anything that their leader says and hopefully not be seen as the last one applauding. I mean, it's a little Stalinist in terms of the overtones of that event there. But that's essentially the message we were given. Don't listen to what he said. We've already retrofit this statement or selected carefully selected excerpts of it into a prepositioned narrative. What Mr. Bundy was actually saying is the exact opposite of what he was accused of saying. He was talking about the fact that we've seen progress in this country with respect to race relations, but lamentably, if you see what the welfare state has done to the black family, it has done greater damage in some ways than officially sanctioned government-imposed segregation did. That's the same point that's been made by a number of people, including Dr. Walter Williams, who's a black academic. And he lamented the fact that so many blacks are in prison. There's actually a new book out called The New Jim Crow. It's written by a black female academic. She's making the same point that Mr. Bundy was making. And he was lamenting the grotesquely high abortion rate among black children, black women and children. That's something that he wouldn't be lamenting if he were a racist. Why would a racist lament the fact that there are fewer black children in the world? Right. But his remarks about Mexican immigrants, I think, are particularly interesting because he was saying that although they came here in violation of our laws, they're here and they're people, and they're good people, they're hardworking people. That's something that got no attention in the media, and that was a message that would not have been well received by at least some of the people there at Bunkerville. I spent some time in Bunkerville and chatted with some of these people, listened to their conversations, and one of the constant refrains they were bringing up was the idea that it would be better to have paramilitary police at the border to stop illegal immigrants from coming across rather than deploying them against ranchers. And I think Mr. Bundy was actually challenging some of their assumptions. He was asking them to move outside their comfort zone and hoping to invite people of all different ethnic backgrounds to recognize that we have a common enemy, and that's the people who are in charge of the state. But that's not the story that's being told.
It's most certainly not. And I find it interesting that even, listening to your eloquent statements on what Bundy was saying, and I agree with you. I've read what he said. I heard what he said, and there were snippets taken here and there. It's a gotcha game, and the end result is to label him a certain to hang a moniker on him so you can neutralize that threat. But again, it is no different than Sterling, although I believe there's a vast character difference.
Yeah, there's a huge character difference.
At the end of the day, they're both private individuals that their situation. Now I'm going to speak to Bundy, not Sterling, because his situation is completely different. It is being used to drive the narrative. But in Bundy's situation, you have a tyrannical government that is using armed force against a citizen of this country, and that story is lost purposefully when you decide you're going to start having the establishment media you use him as some kind of guide for moral authority when it comes to race, creed, whatever. That's not what the whole Bundy situation was about in the first place. And I found it somewhat unbelievable to me that professional trained journalists were able or were reporting on his thoughts on race, regardless of what he thought. It doesn't matter. The reason that the police, or the reason that these armed shock troops were down there, were not because of his race or because of his views on race or his views on blacks or his views on Mexicans or anything else. It was because they were trying to enforce tyrannical government rule over this individual. But that was completely lost by the tactic that they used.
The BLM has been doing so at the expense, among other people, of Western Shoshone Indians who have been driven off their land and reduced to something less than destitution through the same means that the BLM was using to try to confiscate the cattle and destroy the business of Cliven Bundy. If you want to take a look at a genuinely racist institution, look at the BLM and look at the doctrines that they have been enforcing now for decades, and as the Department of the Interior for over a century before that, they're all rooted in the formal legal assumption that Indians are lesser breeds not protected by the law, that they have no property rights, that the federal government is required to respect. The people who are beating up on Cliven Bundy for standing up against the BLM are absolutely silent about what's happened to other ranchers, such as Carrie and Mary Dan and Raymond Yoel. Raymond Yoel is a former chief of the Western Shoshone Timuak Band. These are people that had exactly the same thing done to them. Why aren't the progressives championing the plight of the Shoshone Indians who've been treated the same way that the Bundy family has been treated? It's because the state is their ally. They're cynically using race as a proxy issue in order to defend the totalitarian state. And make no mistake about it, we're dealing with a soft totalitarian regime here in this country.
They're weaponizing race. They're weaponizing race, Will.
Yep. I think
that's all right. William Grigg, it was an honor to have you on our first program on Point here on the Boiling Frog Post. Please give me some sites, give me some information on where I can see some of your work.
My chief outlet is the Pro Libertate blog. freedominourtime.blogspot.com is the direct address. freedominourtime.blogspot.com. Those who'd like to donate, there's a PayPal button there. There's also a place where people can donate by way of Bitcoin. I also contribute to the LewRockwell.com website, L-E-W, and then Rockwell is Norman Rockwell. And Mr. Rockwell's website is very widely read. He republishes a lot of my work at Pro Libertate, and he also has me contribute to the blog section of that website. And my radio program is called Freedom Zealot Radio. It's on every Saturday night at 8 o'clock Mountain Time on the Liberty News Radio Network, which is at libertyroundtable.com. Once again, Freedom Zealot Radio, 8 o'clock Mountain Time at libertyroundtable.com.
Wow, Will, you're everywhere. William Grigg, I know you're under the weather. I greatly appreciate you coming on here. We ran a little bit long, but go get some rest, and thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you so much, Charlie. God bless.
All right, God bless you. And guys, we'll be back next week with another edition of On Point with Charlie McGrath here on the Boiling Frog Post. Have a good week. We'll talk to you next week.